Hi, Internet. Hello, and welcome to the Only Lovers Book Club. We are three Latinx besties who read romance, and we take turns every month. And this month it was my pick. So, because it said love in the title, I assumed this was an anthology of romantic stories. So, I picked it. And so, we're going to discuss these different stories, what was hot, what was not, what we think could have been a little steamier. And fun fact, we are doing the Only Lovers Book Club Romance Challenge and decided that this counts to check the box off for an anthology of Black love stories because I'm going to say 90% of the stories in here involve Black characters. And then all of them, I think, are people of color as a whole. So, yay! If you read this book, you get to check that off in your challenge bingo card. Congratulations, and also thank you for reading more diversely. I spontaneously bought this crown a while ago for no real reason, so now I just have it. And if we read something that is regal sounding, I put it on. I'm drinking a room temperature sparkling Italian wine Lambrusco that I opened and did not finish drinking, so I grabbed it to finish it now. I'm wearing pajamas. My background is my home.
I'm just drinking water and I'm just wearing regular clothes because I no longer own any crowns. I did own crowns once upon a time, but when you move every single year, things just you gotta minimize. And at some point, my crowns have all disappeared. But my background is a still from the live action Aladdin movie, which I haven't seen because I refuse to see any of the live action Disney movies because I'm so faithful to the animated ones. But this reminded me of this was what I was imagining in my head when I was reading the Atem story because it mostly takes place in a marketplace and it has a thief like Aladdin and a princess who is not your regular princess like Jasmine. So that's what I was kind of imagining in my head, and that's the most I could do today. It was just a little Aladdin background.
Part of me also feels like Jesus could be walking by. Like it feels very nativity type vibes.
I thought that it was a still from like a Bible movie. I'm not gonna lie. Like when I first came in, when you first entered the call,
I'm seeing Aladdin now. I'm
yeah,
seeing him.
there he is.
now.
There he is.
Right there.
I was seeing the guy with the wooden staff in the background first. I was like, oh, okay. Like Andrea is Jesus, but I see Aladdin now.
Hello, friends. I am just in my living room. It's just nice, really really nice day here in California. I am wearing like a kind of like a Hawaiian shirt. The vibes are tropical, mainly because I feel like this is a kind of like a beach read. I would have love to have been reading this at home in a hammock by the ocean. I feel like the vibes would have been really nice. But yeah, it's just me, my living room, and I am having a Vizzy Mimosa Hard Seltzer in the flavor of peach orange, which my boyfriend Reed left here, and so now it's mine. So thank you so much, and yeah, I'm excited to discuss with you today.
This month's pick is Love in Color, Mythical Tales from Around the World Retold. I'm going to have Andrea, please give us the about the book, and then Chris will go in about the author. So y'all have a little bit of background about this fine tome.
Love in Color. A high-born Nigerian goddess who has been beaten down and unappreciated by her gregarious lover longs to be truly seen. A young businesswoman attempts a great leap in her company and an even greater one in her love life. A powerful Ghanaian spokeswoman is forced to decide whether she should uphold her family's politics or be true to her heart. In her debut collection, this internationally acclaimed writer retells the most beautiful love stories from history and mythology with incredible new detail and vivacity. Focusing on the magical folk tales of West Africa, this also reimagines Greek myths, ancient legends from the Middle East, and stories from long erased places. With an eye towards decolonizing tropes inherent in our favorite tales of love, has created captivating stories that traverse across perspectives, continents, and genres.
Bolu Babalola is a British Nigerian woman with a misleading bachelor's degree in law and master's degree in American politics and history from UCL. She feels it is important to state that her thesis was on Beyonce's Lemonade, and she was awarded a distinction for it. So essentially, she has a master's degree in Beyonce. A writer of books, scripts, cultural pieces, and retorts, a lover of love, self-coined rom-connoisseur, Bolu Babalola writes stories of fun. Nope, that's not true. Writes stories of dynamic women with distinct voices who love and are loved audaciously. She is a big believer in women being both beauty and the beast. She is not a fan of writing her own bios.
My reading challenge for myself this year was to read books that I already owned. And this book was one that came through when I was doing the feminist book club books. I ended up not continuing that subscription just because I was getting more books than I had time to read, and I kept borrowing library books and then getting stacks of these things. So I decided to just put a pause on it. But yeah, this was part of one of the book boxes that came in, and it looked really nice and really cool. And because we were trying to read more diversely, I was like, okay, cool. Like this feels like a nice opportunity to read different like mythical tales, which I always think could be really fun if it's, something that I'm familiar with. Some of these I was not familiar with, which was, fine. I appreciated learning about new mythical tales. And yeah, I think I realize that I pick a lot of anthologies, so I'm going to stop that because I want to try to pick more like focused stories. I enjoy this, but I realize that I set myself up for a struggle with these anthologies because since I don't know what is coming up next, I don't know if I'm going to be in the right headspace to read them. And it's hard to kind of read multiple anthology stories in a row, at least for me. I don't know if you guys can kind of like sit down and read through it, but it is a little like, I don't know why I keep doing this to myself. I have the same thing happen every time I pick one of these up to read. I'm like, oh, I'll read an anthology. That'll be really fun. And then I get through like two and it's like, nope, I can't keep reading. I gotta take a break. So for now, this is the last anthology that I'm going to pick. I'm going to go through the book club picks, make sure I didn't accidentally pick another anthology. If I did, don't worry about it. We'll do that one. But 2025, no anthologies.
I mean, are you trying to read all of them all at once? I'm sorry, I'm here from feeding a cat. I'm just curious.
I read in chunks. Like I will be like, oh, let me read like 2 or 3 of them. But then I'll get through 1 or 2 and then it's like, oh, whoops. I'm not in the mind space to do this.
The critique is coming from inside the house. Neither me or Andrea are having an issue with the books you're picking. I will read whatever you put in front of me, and I will read whatever you put in front of me, and we'll discuss it. And if it's good, it's good, and if it's bad, we'll talk about it. Like there's no pressure for you to do more work than you're already doing. So I just
you all read 4 books in the Horsemen of the Apocalypse.
Yeah.
Series, so.
we've done our time. And so if you
we've all
are
asked
like
things of each other is what I'm saying.
Yeah, there is a balance. Thanks, a balance
guys.
here. So it's not I mean I don't want to I hear you, and I know that if you want to do that, I want to empower you and encourage you to do that. But if you're like, fuck it, I just picked this book, I didn't have enough time or whatever, then fucking we'll just fucking read it. When has that ever stopped us?
Thanks, guys.
It's okay.
This is an accepting book club internet.
Of course it is. I mean,
so
yeah.
With this in mind, with that said, spoilers abound. If you want to read this for yourself, get your impressions, come back, see if you agree or disagree with us. Want to yell at the computer and tell us that we're all, ignorant, go for it. So be warned. So let's get into our overall impressions. How did you guys feel about this collection? However far you may have gotten through it, what did it leave you feeling? Overall, what's the spark notes of it? Drea, do you want to go first?
Sure. I read the whole thing. I think my expectations were that I would like this as much as the other anthology we read that had the word love in the title, because I now have like certain expectations of like love does not equal like happy endings when it comes to anthologies anyways. So that was my expectation, and it was met. I think like this was not the anthology for me for a variety of reasons. I think I'm really particular with like the style of how people write, like that can really take me out of a story. And I think like the author and I, we just don't click in terms of like how she writes, or at least how she wrote these stories. And then I think the other thing against me is that I'm not a huge myth person. I was not familiar with any of these myths. I still think it's a book that I would recommend to other people. Like, I posted about it recently on my Instagram and someone was like, "Oh my gosh." And I was like, "Yes, you would love this book because you love myths and you love stories and retellings. Like, this is perfect for you. It just wasn't perfect for me, you know?" That said, I have ideas for how some of the stories could have been more perfect for me, and and I will share that when we talk about them.
Let's put a pin on when we get to questions.
Confession time. I did not finish the entire anthology, and I hope you can forgive me, Tashai. Honestly, I just did not have a ton of time this month. It's reaching the end of the semester. I think since my road trip in April, it has been non-stop stuff, and I found that it has taken a toll on my reading time, including my book club reading time, which is sometimes what I prioritize. So I'm only prioritizing really my book club reads, and even so, I realized it just kind of snuck up on me, and I didn't get a chance to read it. But I did do a couple of them. I got about, let me count how many stories I got in. I got seven. I got seven in. I didn't make it to New Tales. My plan is to finish reading them because I enjoy reading anthologies. I have like a cool little system for it. I have a book club about anthologies. I found myself really enjoying these stories. I think maybe because of we've been burned before with a love on the title for an anthology, I kind of came to it with a very open mind because I felt like it wasn't going to be romantic stories through and through. I felt like it was going to run the gamut of all of the experience within love. I feel like that was the takeaway for Who's Loving You. And I think that's kind of like the copy paste apply that same theme here, where we are experiencing like new love, return to love, love lost. And so there's a lot of things to explore in the theme of love. I'm also a myth kid. I definitely had mythology books when I was growing up. My mom used to get me the DK Witness books. I had books on like Egyptian mythology and Greek mythology, African tales, indigenous tales. And so very much my jam to read a retelling. From the ones that I did get to read, I think my reading also got slowed down because I got lost in the mythology of it. Like I would read the story and then I don't know if you noticed, but in the titles of the journal that I made for us, I included like just a Wikipedia link or just some link in case you didn't know what the myth was supposed to be or didn't know what that deity was. If there was a legend associated with it, it's in there. And so I kind of would go back and like read a little bit about it and see if I'm like, oh, I see what she was trying to do with this. Maybe I gave myself a little bit more work, but I've been enjoying my reading journey so far. I have a couple of favorites. I have a couple that I'm just like, okay. As with any anthology, there's going to be some that are really, really good stories, some that are not great. I don't necessarily like to focus on that because I feel like it's just a given. There's going to be, and especially if it's like a single author, showing us their range of stories. Like some are going to be stunners and some are like, and I have a couple, that I have really enjoyed. So overall, my experience has been good. I'm interested in hearing what you liked and what you didn't like to see like where we match in terms of that. But yeah, definitely. I love me an anthology and I was excited to read this one. I've had it since I was, I think I was a brand ambassador for the feminist book club and it came in a book box. And so I've had it. I was like, oh, great. If I hadn't been for Only Lovers, this probably would have been a queerthology pick eventually because I keep all my anthologies in one section to see like, when I can get around to them. So yeah, those are my overall impressions. Let's see what else we can get into.
I will say, Chris, I really appreciated that you included all those links. Unfortunately, I had already read all the stories by the time we got I was already in the part where it was like new contemporary stories. So,
Yeah.
but it would have been very useful and maybe would have, if I had read them like before the stories. So I appreciate the effort. I just really wanted to get gold on this one. And honestly, it's good that I read them so early because then all my eye issues started and I've been reading like very, very slowly since then. So probably would not have finished the anthology if I had left it for later.
I didn't know there was a list of links until right now when you talked about it. So
Yeah, if you go to the titles, and I feel like I had mentioned this in the message that I sent you, but it's okay. If you hover over the title, it'll take you to the, so if you don't know like ocean, like if you don't know the Yoruba myth or the Yoruba people, I mean, I felt like it was a good learning moment. Like there's going to
Yeah.
be, we are very white centric in the myths that we like to tell, right?
Mhm.
And so I feel like we have all of these romantic retellings of fucking
Pride and
Hades
Prejudice.
and Persephone. No, I just mean like in myth telling. Like
Yeah.
we focus on the Greek myths a lot. There's a lot of like feminist retelling of this and that, of Medusa's story and Penelope's story and whatever. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like they don't really get, myths and legends from other countries don't necessarily get the spotlight. And because of that, I felt like I didn't know quite as many, aside from maybe, right, the Thousand and One Tales, like the what's, Aladdin, Sherazad, and I feel like we've mentioned that one before, where there's that continual storytelling situation. I just wanted to put it in there in case you were curious, in case you were interested, because I am. So if you never get around to it, it's fine. But it is there if you are curious, if you're like, what the heck was actually going on in the story, then you can actually like read who, Sia was, and like why exactly, she was such a warrior and, was having all these issues with his clan people. Is when I was looking for these stories, a lot of them kind of refer, like the blog posts were talking about Love and Color and how I read this here and I think you should know more about it. So it's kind of like, literature as a window, you can look out into other cultures. I'm like going back to my professor days, but it's kind of a cool way to learn a little bit more about the world. So yeah, the links are there if you want them.
I really appreciate the slides. Kristen made it easy for me to kind of like read 2 or 3, go in, jot down thoughts, go out, go in, read 2 or 3, jot down. So thank you very much. I was once again just entered this completely ignorantly and was like, I should recognize some of these. And then with the ones I didn't recognize, I was like, cool. This is like a fun story. Like I am enjoying it. And then overall, it was pretty good. There were a lot of them where I could see how it could be like a much longer story and a lot steamier and could have had a lot more kind of like going on. And I think with some of them, I think modernizing it weakened what it like could have been, because I think a lot of the value in some of these myths kind of, they become more charming and it becomes more of like a luring tale because of a lot of what has to do with like the setting and the tensions involved when some of these like original tales were written. And I also think it was like strong and then kind of like petered down, and then there were like 1 or 2 that I enjoyed later on, but I enjoyed it enough to finish reading it and like talk about it. I don't think I would read it again. Of the ones that we read, what would be your top story? Like, and feel free if you had 2 or 3 that you kind of ranked similarly, we can just kind of list them off and see if we had similar votes for those.
My favorite overall story was Atem, the one that I made my background. I gave it a 3.5, which was my highest rating. There were a lot of 2s and 1s, so this was definitely my highest rated story. And I think it was just because I liked the setting. It did give me that kind of like Aladdin Jasmine vibes, which was one of my favorite like Disney movies growing up. I've always liked kind of that like forbidden love when it's actually like we will behead you for this love, as opposed to just like, oh, we're from different social classes. Like, no, if there's no beheading, it's not truly forbidden. So I do like that trope. I like the ending. I think there were a lot of stories in this anthology that I thought had potential, but really disappointed me with how they ended. And this was one where I felt, I liked the ending. I felt like it matched the story and what the characters had gone through and like what I was hoping. Yeah, that was probably my favorite overall. In terms of pairings, I think I really liked the couple from the Thea story, the warrior. That was one where I just really hated the ending, and that's why I didn't rate it higher. But I liked, like, I would want to read a full novel version of this that ended in a different way. Mostly because I felt like we, as the reader, just got like cheated out of like knowing what happened. and that really irked me. Like, I really wanted to know what ended up happening, however it went, like whether he fought and died or like she fought and whatever. I just wanted to know what happened, and I really hated that we didn't like get to see that. And then another couple that I really liked in terms of like who me, Drea, would personally want to date, the guy who owned the inn and had the pet cow is probably the one that I would have gone for. I do tend to like that kind of romance too, I think, where it's like not necessarily a but kind of like a famous person who's like in the arts and like the plebe, that like falls in love with them and helps them like get away from capitalism and like do what they like. I love that kind of thing. I think I don't know. I don't know what exactly I wanted more from the story, but I did like him as a love interest, and I just really would like to have a pet cow.
Okay, we have some overlap, which is very exciting for me. One of my favorite stories from the ones that I did read was Nefertiti, because be gay, do crime. Like, it was a queer story. First of all, I was like, okay, I'm all in. And then there's like this bichota, like in this club, punishing men for being pieces of shit, going against this corrupt police system. Like, I was very on board with this kind of like descent into like the underworld. I like Nefertiti as a historical figure and a figure of myth. I have a book about her and her hubbo back in ancient Egypt, and how she was just as a super powerful pharaoh in her time, and a real trailblazer for the feminists, for the women's. So I enjoyed that. I liked the plot. It was such a tight little story. I felt like I got everything that I wanted out of it. Right. I wanted to know who the pairing was, obviously, how they were going to meet, how it was going to work, and, if it was going to work out. And I love going the dark side, be gay, do crime. I'm all in for that. I also enjoyed the Sia story. That was the next one. It's right about the warrior, and Madi was the her best friend, and her bodyguard, and her first fighter. And I have to say that, I guess, given the nature of short stories, I don't mind an ambiguous ending. Like, I can see how like you would hate that, because you want to know what happens to them at the end. Like, does he survive? Does she go after him? I thought it kind of ended perfectly, mainly because the love that needed to happen happened. Like, they were able to tell each other and show each other how much they loved each other before this like probably catastrophic event was going to happen. And I didn't need to see the catastrophe. I just wanted to kind of like live in that fantasy. And I feel like the story was letting us do that, letting us kind of see her discover that she could have love, even if it wasn't this moment, even if it was in this very dire moment. Maybe she was not ever going to have love like this again, because if she'd gone on her own, she would have been killed. If when he went in her stead, he would have died. Or maybe they both end up like, I like being able to also write my own story in these cases. And so in my mind, she catches up with him and they go kick ass together. And then, I enjoyed that one a lot. I thought it was extremely romantic. I think that one of the other highlights was the very last story that I read was Psyche and Eros, just because I felt like the translation of the myth to the modern day worked really well. Hera and Aphrodite and all of these like really stuck up goddesses working at like a super corporate cutthroat, business. I thought, I was like, this is very fitting. Like, I could see that. And Eros being kind of like a rich, coddled, kind of privileged guy, kind of giving it all up for his woman. You know what I mean? I love that. I love it when men humble themselves like that. Yeah, give up all your wealth. Like, I know that maybe some of us would not like that, but in the fantasy of this story, I'm like, fuck it. Like, his sister sounded awful. He sounded like he was fucking coasting. And he had to give up a lot to not get that much in return. I want to say, like, he had to give up like being with the person that he fell in love with. And I just felt like that was the best of possible endings for that one. So those are my 3 favorite stories and my 3 favorite pairings. But if I had to pick my favoriteest pairing, it's got to be Nefertiti and oh gosh, I forgot the chick's name, but you know what I'm talking about. You know what story I'm talking about. I was like,
Yeah,
very
I will
excited
say
to
I was
see.
very excited that there was a gay story in here. Like I really, and literally in my notes, I said rated this higher only because it's gay and there are sexy weapons. I think it's just, again, it's like a writing style thing for me. Like I can see how you would totally be into that story. For me, I was only into it because they were gay and they were weapons. And like that's not an
Yeah.
like I want to be into it for more reasons than
Yeah,
just that, you
okay,
know?
listen, I'm like if there's like a seedy club, I'm in. If there's like
A
hard ass
knife
woman,
strapped to
a
a thigh.
knife in the strapped to a thigh, I am all in. There was nothing in this. I was never gonna not like the story.
I was thinking about you when it was that scene where she like finds that they're at the table and she like notices the weapons. It made me think of how you reacted to the rum book.
The flask.
With the-
Listen, anything strapped to a beautiful woman's thighs, I'm very there. I'm very in there. I'm excited to hear like the other pairings that I didn't hear about, like this cow man. Like I'm like, who is that? What's that story?
Oh, sorry.
Tell me more.
That is Xenu, and it's like she's like a pop singer and but is like only singing the kinds of things that like her mom's like her manager and is like terrible, and the car breaks down and they have to stop at this inn for the night, and the innkeeper is like very handsome in like a rustic humble innkeeper kind of way and he has a pet cow and she like sings for him, and it's like the first time she's ever sang an original song, you know, and so she sings it for him and the cow. The cow is listening too. So yeah, I thought the story could be stronger, but I really enjoyed the idea of
Got
this
it.
man and the inn and the cow.
Are we
I would
talking?
play that cozy game, okay?
Oh yes, that would be fun.
Oh no, what happens to be strapped to my thigh? This boba jelly. Drink, Christina. Strapped to my thigh, right? Oh no.
I'm in love with you now.
Mm.
I'm in love with you now. I'm coming for the boba.
It's okay. It's passion fruit boba. So
Ugh, delicious.
juicy, juicy, juicy. So I really like Nefertiti. Boss lady vibes, the themes. Ivan and I just saw Monkey Man a couple of weeks ago in theaters. So I was like, oh shit. Yeah, okay, cool. This feels like that of like getting justice against a corrupt government, sexy ladies, violence. I was like, okay, cool. I said I also liked that it was gay and violent, but not violent against the gays. It was the gays being violent against the pieces of shit. So this one was highly rated. I also gave it high in sugar and spice because I think that the like attraction was so quick. You knew they were into each other. I didn't expect her to be a co-op, but then it turns out she's a co-op. So I'm like, ooh, this is like the Departed. Who's betraying who? You know. So I was into that. I also gave a high rating to Alagomeji, which was the last story, because I thought it was really sweet. It's two people born in the same town, but in different streets and similar families and similar backgrounds, but they don't meet until they both get sent to like a boarding school. And that at the boarding school, they become friends and then they like are into each other. And it's like really short, and it's more like someone, it's written like, oh, there was a prince and a princess type of storytelling, but it's describing the lives of this guy and girl. And just the fact that it's kind of like, oh, it's pseudo fated love, but they were childhood friends. Then they went to different universities. Like they got to miss each other because they went to different schools and stayed in touch through writing letters. And then they get together, and you already know, like at the beginning of the story, that they end up together. But the whole thing is like, oh, it's 40 years later, and they still really like talking to each other and can laugh with each other and make each other laugh. And that I really liked. I like relationships that are portrayed as like even after all this time, like we can still be friends. And that to me is like aspirational love. It's not necessarily, oh, we're always gonna be like hot for each other. It's we're you know, we can have a good time with each other and enjoy each other's company. And that to me is like the goal when I think about what love could be. So I gave it a high rating because I really liked the idea, even though we didn't get to actually see this relationship, because it's almost like the overview of what this relationship was, the way that it's written. I thought the idea of it was really nice. I also I liked Sherazade. I always thought it was like Scheherazade, but I think that I'm pronouncing wrong. I liked that one because I wish that this was a mini series, because I think it could be a really sexy political thriller. I wish it had had more spice, but I liked the narrative of it. And it was cool that they both were in like positions of power that weren't the same but felt equal. So I thought it was nice to have this like game of like sexy chess. A couple of others like I did enjoy, even if I didn't rate them as high. Like I thought Osun was a nice like introduction into the stories. I did like Atem because the lady being sneaky and just like getting hers when she wanted to get hers. I liked there were a few that I rated a little higher because I liked the concept of the story, even if the story itself didn't quite deliver to where I wanted it to deliver. But yeah, those were like my tops.
I'm really interested for
Top
Chris
lady.
to read that last story. That was one of your favorites because that was one of my least favorites, and I only
Yeah.
rated it 1 star. So
Yeah.
I'd be curious to see where Chris falls on the spectrum of the of the 1 to 5.
Well, I know that Olegameji is inspired by the author's real life parents. So I'm interested in reading it because it's like based on like, so the new tales is like, I don't know if it's based on people that she knows or it's just stories that she's heard. But that one specifically is about her parents. Like,
Yeah.
and so I think it's interesting that you're like, I love it. And then Andrea's
Well,
like,
it's not that I didn't love the story. It's just that here the writing style irked me more than
Gotcha,
in
okay.
any other story.
I
I
see,
was
I see,
like,
I see.
I cannot.
Okay. Well, I will read it and report back for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, let me know because I thought it was really sweet. I like didn't know where it was gonna go, and a couple paragraphs in, I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of like almost like a Guillermo del Toro starting the narration of what is about to happen in Pan's Labyrinth. But that's the entire story. It's like there was a prince and a princess, and she was born like this, and he was born like this, and they grew to become like acquaintances, that like that.
Mhm.
So maybe you like it.
Okay, I'm excited.
How do you think this rewrite of these myths was successful, but also where do you think it didn't quite work? And whether it's the stories that were chosen or the writing style or what they decided to do with the stories, just like what was your point of view? What is something you think you would have wanted to do differently? But if there was something you really did like, can you give that a shout out?
Yeah, I think for me, obviously, I didn't know the originals, so I can't really compare them in terms of like how well did this capture this story. But I think what I can talk about is I think it's really hard in a short story to capture like a myth, which I mean, I realize some of the originals can be short, but I think like the way the author was doing them here, where a lot of them got turned into contemporaries and stuff like that, I think is the same issue I have sometimes when like historical stories get retold as like contemporary stories, like for example Pride and Prejudice, which we've read a couple. I think it can be really hard to capture that like yearning and longing and that like true like I would die for you belief that like makes some of these stories like so impactful. I think can sometimes be hard for me to feel in a short story because I often just feel like I felt this with a lot of these stories. I felt like I didn't have enough time to really be invested in like the stakes that these characters were all in, and I felt like some of these situations were so kind of intense and otherworldly, and like it was very clear that these people were like soulmates and like fated to be together, but I just couldn't feel it because the story was so short. And I think for me that's more of an issue with the length than necessarily the fact that they were retellings. There were several of these stories that I think I would have enjoyed a lot more if it had been like a whole novel exploring like the situation that she kind of put them in. So for me that was my only qualm. And I think, and again, that happens with a lot of retellings that I read. It's like I recently read a Sound of Music retelling, and it's just really hard to get that like yearning glance across a room, you know, in like a modern kind of situation where like the stakes are just not the same. So I think the modern ones were especially hard for me to get into, more so than the ones clearly set in historical periods a lot further back. But yeah, that was my thing. And again, I can't comment on like how good of a retelling it was, but for me it was just, it's hard for me to feel the stakes in such a short story.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I think that the amount of stories and therefore the length of the stories kind of did a disservice to the epicness of what some of these love stories could be. I feel like I would have loved to read like 4 novella length versions, like 4 of my favorites, just like 4 in here, Love and Color, 4 myths retold. And then I feel like then it would have had a lot more space to, yeah, to explore those stakes. That being said, I do think that the assignment was completed. Like I think that she wanted to do something and she did that. It's exactly that. My only critique aside from, you know, what I'm agreeing with you right now is the fact that they felt very formulaic despite, you know, despite it being various, you know, myths share a lot of commonalities across cultures, and romance follows many similar tropes. And so when you can kind of predict where the story is going, it doesn't make it quite as enjoyable when you have to do so much in so little time. I will say that. I liked it when stories, I didn't mention it before, but it's Shahrazad's story. I enjoyed it a lot. And I didn't include it in my most favorite pairings because it didn't have like a happy ending. But I thought it was a very strong story told in a very short amount of time that ended very tragically. And that's the whole thing that I'm talking about of, you know, experiencing love and in the heartbreak, the sense of heartbreak and loss. And I also feel like it subverted the original story. So I feel like that story in particular did a lot. It was a well-crafted story in of itself. It played around with the idea of Sherazad telling stories. In this case, she's telling stories to herself about why she doesn't like want this love or whatever. And then she accepts it and tells the story of what that love became and then how she loses that love. And in the original story, you know, they do end up together. She kind of like wins him over by telling him story after story to keep herself alive. And so she manages to survive and they kind of like live happily ever after because of this, you know, in some versions of it anyway. So I thought that was really good. And so when the ending was when the story wasn't exactly not copy pasted, but it didn't follow the format of like, I'm a sexy person in a sexy hot market. And I saw this other sexy hot person approaching me at the sexy hot market. It's like, yeah, meet cute. We're going to find out what happens. And more often than not, you know, they end up together. That's kind of why I also like the Sia story a lot, because I feel like that ending was very like, what the fuck is going to happen? And if I am intrigued and not too frustrated, because I know I sometimes like want more information, but again, with a short story, I don't need it. I just tell me that story and end it in an interesting way that'll leave me like shit. And that's kind of what happened with both of those stories. I don't have any like critiques of like what could be better. I do feel like less stories and a little bit longer length would have been super cool.
Thank you guys for your observations. I agree with everything that you guys are saying. I definitely agree with the idea of having fewer stories to make them longer. And I think in maybe the spirit of representing a bunch of different myths and kind of trying to provide a larger variety of stories, it did a disservice to the stories that were set up to be like really strong, because it didn't give them the space to grow into what they could have been. Because a lot of these have the framework and the world building of something that could have been really, really juicy, like political intrigue, sexy gay mob. Like there was so much going on in some of these stories that could really be expanded. So I'm sad that, you know, we didn't get the opportunity to read that. And I also feel like Andrea was saying, it is really hard to capture the essence in something that is this short and also that has been like modernized. And that was kind of like that was one of my gripes with some of these is it's like when we read the Pride and Prejudice as
In New
as
York,
you are,
just as you are.
just as you are. That one was really bad. Like I really did not like that story because it went so far in the direction of modernizing this classic story that everything that sets it apart as a read was just super watered down, and things that were character traits that differentiated a character in the original retelling was cranked up and really annoying in the modern take of it. So I think when you're gonna modernize it, you just have to be really, really careful with the approach, because you can lose a lot of what makes it something that became like myth canon. So I agree with a lot of the points you both made on this. I am really upset that there wasn't more sex in some of these, because I think that would have heightened the tension in a lot of the stories. And it's like, I appreciate maybe the need to fade to black, because I don't think that, I mean, I don't know. I've read some, when I was younger, we went to the Grand Canyon and we bought one of these like Native American, like native myth books, whatever, and they were dirty. Like they were dirty. I was definitely sneak reading this and like, oh yes, this collection of myths. Like the origin of Cocopelli was like in some book I read when I was younger, and he was fucking, like that was the whole thing, was he was the fertility spirit and was like fucking everybody. And they were, you know, descriptive in these stories. And so I thought we were going to get like a little bit of something something in some of these. And so even if there is sex in the story, it's very, very light. It's very fade to black, which is sad because some of these would have been really hot. Some of these had the potential to be really hot. So I was definitely sad that they did not sprinkle it in there. That would have been like a fun time. How did you guys feel?
No, I agree with you. I know that Andrea saying this should have had more sex is probably not something you hear very often in book club. But I do agree that I think it could have made some of these stories stronger. It could have helped raise the stakes that I was talking about before, and also just get me more invested in the couples, like as couples. I don't think every story needed it, but I think even just heightening the because I'm a big believer in like you can have a lot of sexual tension. You know, I just felt like a lot of these stories didn't even have that like chemistry or that tension leading up to like, oh, something might happen kind of thing either. Definitely some of them I was more upset than with others that there wasn't something like Chris, you haven't read this one yet, but the Thisbe one, a guy and a girl, and they're in college and their rooms like share a wall and they can like hear each other and they like send messages and like bang on they can hear each other's playlists and stuff. And I like that concept a lot, but I feel like it would have done a lot better if it was like erotica. Like if I'm gonna read a shared wall trope, like there should at least be like a masturbation scene or something. I just feel like otherwise it's just like that's the whole point, you know what I mean? It's like, ooh, I can hear what they're doing and now I'm imagining them and like now I like desire them without having seen them or knowing what they look like. Like I feel like that's the whole point of doing the shared
Yes.
wall thing. So I didn't understand why that wasn't part of the story like at all.
I 1000% agree. I gave it 2 stars because I was like,
Just
like this
because
could
of
have been
that.
more interesting. Like
The story
they
needed a
barely,
glory hole. The story needed a glory hole
like
so
they barely
desperately.
talked. Didn't love the format of it.
And
They
so
didn't
that's just one
like.
example, but obviously, yeah, there are other stories that could have used it too. But I think that's the one that comes to my mind, and that's why I pulled up those notes when you answered the question because I was like, I wrote it down. That's how upset I was that there. I didn't even need sex, but like something, because otherwise, I don't know. Anyway, yes, I think some of these stories could have benefited from some form of intimacy and some form of tension, regardless of what actually went on the page.
I think it's interesting to hear you say like, oh, this could have used more spice. I also agree. In the short little cluster of stories that I read, I was like, are we always gonna like be behind closed doors? Okay, that's fine. But I think it's one of those like hallmarks of romance writing that we are just used to reading in stories as well. I think that, yeah, punctuating a really high emotional moment with physical intimacy, be it brushing by, pinkies brushing by, someone holding a hand, um kissing, hugging, right? Or love making the day before you might be
Or just
going to
talking
die.
like a little dirty talk or
Yeah.
something.
I think that that's kind of like the downfall of the love and the a love slash romance of the stories, is because many of these stories, the love is a given, right? It's assumed, right? These two people are fated to be together, and that build up doesn't necessarily happen. You know that it's going to happen, and the build up is very mid, like, oh, he came up to her and he talked to her again, like the marketplace thing, like, or I'm at like this cool like concert or festival because I like go to like Orisha magic school, and I have powers, but like it's a given, and a lot of like, oh yes, our bodies move together, and I think that the kind of stories that like myths tell are very like carnal, right? Come from a time where at the time that these myths are created, people were like fucking in caves, okay? Like they were like fucking in temples and it was hot. And that freedom of like lack of self-consciousness or just kind of like ancient ancestral like love making, ancient ancestral like love and sex was just not on the page. And especially when you take it away from that kind of like ancestral setting and you put it in the modern day. I mean, people are horny now. So what happened?
I will say I think part of that is because this is marketed more as literary fiction.
Yeah. It's not romance.
It's as opposed to romance. And I think that has a lot to do with it because I feel like I've read things that are like romance adjacent, but anytime it gets marketed as literary fiction, it's like a scandal when there's sex in it. You know what I mean? People are like, ooh, this book is so sexy, you know, because that's not the given. I feel like, do you know what I mean? Like, I wonder, like, me thinking about the behind the scenes, I wonder if this was a conversation with her editor at any point about like how much steam they wanted to include in the book because of the markets it was going to go into. Like, I'd be really curious about that too.
I don't know. Maybe it's like a personal preference thing. I thought it was interesting that there was like absolutely no spice in this and barely any sugar, I'll be honest. But I mean it like as in like there was like barely any like romantic tension. But I agree that that's why I guess this is lit fic and this isn't romance, although it would have benefited a lot from the intimacy that you do see in romance novels.
We all wanted more fucking, and you know what? It's justified.
So controversial. So
girl.
controversial. I'm shook.
In this romance book club, wow.
Of all the things I expected to hear, I did not expect to hear Tashai and Andrea wanted more sex in the story. But I also think that that goes to show that it can really help a story go. Like, I know that everyone has like their barometer of like how much is too much, but I think all of us appreciate when a sex scene is done well and when a sex scene really does add to the coming together of the characters. I think it's like super important, especially in the romance genre, to just understand that it's not always just a gratuitous thing. It adds to the story.
If you could pick one from this selection that had like good bones that you could rewrite, or you could challenge somebody else who you know would do a good job of rewriting it, like which one would you pick?
Okay. I think I have my answer actually.
Go for it.
Because the story Orin, Chris, you won't have read this either. It's one of the like new contemporary ones. It's the girl and the guy who are both at like a bar with dates. And then they end up like kind of ditching their dates and clicking with each other. I put in my notes, this feels like every 24-hour romance indie movie I have ever seen. And I stand by that. And I think that I could have made it not feel that way if I was writing it, me personally. I thought it had, for me, the good bones was I thought it had like good dialogue or like good chemistry between the characters, but it just felt too much like every other single scenario of this I've seen before. And so I just think I could do it differently. So I'm going to go with that one.
I have an idea of how a story could go, but not in this book. I, again, think that the author did what she came to do. She accomplished her goals, and I don't see myself rewriting any of them this way because I don't write in the style. And I just think it was her vision more than anything to get it done this way. I mean, I would read anything Andrea writes.
I would say I know which story I would want you to rewrite.
Okay, which one? You can tell me.
I haven't read it yet. It's called Naleli.
Naleli.
It was the only YA in the bunch.
Oh.
And this is not me trying to get you to come to the kidlit side, but also yes, it is. But it was just about a girl who had, I forget what it's called now, when your skin is like different pigments.
Vitiligo.
Yes. Yes. And so she's like really self-conscious about her body. And she's also been friends with this guy since they were kids. And now he's like the most popular like guy in school. And like he still digs her, but she's like so self-conscious about like her skin and her body that she like won't let herself receive anything, you know, from this guy. And so the book pretty much takes place like it's like flashbacks to their friendship when they were younger. And then like modern place is like her attending this pool party. And it's his birthday party. It's a pool party. And it's like a big moment for her and whatever. And anyway, I just think you could have done a lot more with this character and with him, because I also felt like they had a lot of issues that happened when they were friends and it all got resolved too easily. And I feel like the whole Christina never forgets thing would really come in handy here, because you would make him work to get the forgiveness for all the things his friends did over the years. You wouldn't just be like, oh, you think I'm pretty? Okay, we can date. Like, no, you would be like, bitch, your friends were like mean to me. Like, how are you going to show me that you value me? And so I think you just could have taken it in a cooler direction.
I agree. Yeah, because it's like your friends bullied me.
Yeah.
Your ex-girlfriend
She forgives
harassed
so
me
easily.
for years. Fuck you. I would probably try to rewrite the psyche one, because I'm like, I don't understand what this media platform business idea is. Is it an app? Is it a website? Is it a podcast? They just say platform. I'm like, I don't know what this means. How do you monetize this? And while I do like the idea of friends to lovers, I never like understand when you like someone this much, then not telling them anything for years because your sister's a bitch. Like, really?
Yeah, listen, it wasn't like my top favorite. I like that he finally came around, but it took him a long time.
I'm like, this conversation could have happened offline. You could have gotten coffee somewhere and be like, look, I really like you, but my sister's a bitch and I can't actually work anywhere because I don't have a resume. So
Yeah, I don't have any skills.
let's figure this out. With which myth or tale or story that you know would you like to retell into some sort of romance or erotica, or like modern retelling, or if it's a modern story that you would like to make it a myth, what would you pick?
This like just came to me, but now I want someone to write this. It probably won't be me, but someone listening should, and then send it to me. I don't know if Robin Hood counts as a myth, but I would want Robin Hood, but the Disney version, but she's a girl fox shifter. And it's it's a lesbian fox shifter Robin Hood version. That's what I want.
That would be so fun.
Right? I just feel like it would be so fun.
Okay, so I think that we're all familiar / fans of the Lizzie Bennett Diaries web series like that, like Carmilla, and stuff like, just web series that are kind of like vloggy. I've always thought that the 1001 Nights could be something like that. Somebody who is writing like 1001 blogs, and their boss is gonna like chop their head off if they don't get this done, and so they have to come up with like these wacky kind of like cliffhanger type of blogs or vlogs, like video. Like, I don't know if this would work now because it's more of a short
Yes, it could
form.
be TikToks.
Yeah, like a TikTok, like 1001 TikToks. I think that would be a cool way of retelling the story. It has already been retold many, many times, but if I were to put that in a modern setting, that's what I would do. I would be like, I would make it some sort of like media production. And yeah, Sherazade, she's a good storyteller. She's always got a great story to tell. And she's like, okay, I can figure this out. And Natasha Lyonne is Sherazade in it for some reason. That's what I'm thinking about.
Like, I know that this would take so much time and so much. No, I know this would take so much time and so much money, but I would watch the shit out of that if you made. I would open a TikTok account just to be able to watch all the TikToks without having been sent the link.
So I don't know that much about myths, so I was thinking that I would love to have, like, I don't know a lot about Puerto Rican mythology, about like Taino history and like mythology, the dios, the like los cacique, or I just don't know anything really about like los semi and all that stuff. So then I went online and I was like, okay, vamos a buscar like Taino mythology or whatever. And so then it was like, oh, it'd be cool. Because I found Wikipedia. I was like, they have an entry for Atabey. But I was reading up about her, and it was like, oh, she's the embodiment of nature and the ancestral spirit of freshwater and fertility, and gives birth to like twins. And then there's like the story of what happens with the twins. I don't know that much about Puerto Rican mythology and legends, which is like really sucks. But I think, you go to school, you learn about like Greek mythology and all that stuff. So I think it'd be cool if there was retellings of Puerto Rican deities and semis and goddesses and stuff.
It'd be fun. Let's pitch it to Banco Popular. They can make it into like the Christmas special.
Just for the culture to preserve, to like teach people, but also to like have it out there. Any final thoughts for the audience?
Oh, I think one story that we didn't mention, and it wasn't one of my favorites or anything, but I just thought it was cool, the tiara story, because it reminded me of the book we just read for Only Lovers, Chris's pick. So if you're only gonna check out a handful of stories and you were like, oh, I really, really love the Case and Calendar book that you all discussed last month, I would say the tiara one has like similar vibes. That's the one where like her ex is like famous and is like, what if he wins like an Oscar or a Golden Globe or something, so it was like back in town to accept the award.
Win some award. I remember I read that one and I was like, you break up so he could get famous, and then you don't talk again for like 2 years, and suddenly he shows up and grand gestures like, oops, I had to leave so I could be successful, but I still love you. Get the fuck out of here. Wait, how much did they pay you for that last one?
Anyway, it just reminded me so much of our like discussions during the previous hangout, and that made me happy. So
Nice. Good call out for our listeners.
Yeah, for sure. If you're looking for a good story to read the Nefertiti one. It's if you're looking for queer violence, because that's my favorite kind of violence, then violence done by queers, two bad guys. And that's the one that I would recommend for sure to read. And if you're into literary fiction that tackles themes of love in all of its aspects, then this might be the anthology for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for reading through this anthology with me. I'm glad to have picked it for this because it made me like actually pick it up and finally read it. It's been on my bookshelf for so long, and when I first got it, I was really excited to check it out, but obviously got distracted and did not read it. So, thanks for taking the time, and I'm glad that we had a good chat through it and we found stuff we liked and we found stuff that could be stronger. And we found Andrea's next story that she's going to write and sell, and it'll pay for her future house. So excited about that. And Christina's future series that none of you heard about because Christina redacted it from this video. So stay tuned. We'll let you guys know when it's available. So are you guys reading anything else right now? I need to borrow some library books or something. I need to pick what I'm going to take while we're traveling because I will be gone soon for my honeymoon. Yay!
we've all read Yellowface, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm reading basically like the Puerto Rican version of Yellowface. It's
Ooh.
called Victim. It just came out very recently, and I say it's like the Puerto Rican version of Yellowface because it's like a similar vibe. Like the theme of this one is like how we use trauma, and sometimes not necessarily our trauma, but also the trauma of the people around us to get ahead in the publishing world because that's what sells.
I'm kind of like finally making my way through a couple of other book club books, but the one I'm finding myself coming back to the most is a library hold. I saw it's called Blood Sisters by Vanessa Lilly, and it is an indigenous thriller, and it's very much like your kind of like thriller, like, oh no, this body was found and they just have to figure it out. She's got a lot of baggage with her sister being missing, and it's like they're trying to solve like this mystery or this murder that happened when they were younger.
Guys, next month we're going to be reading Andrea's pick. Andrea, what did you pick for next month?
So it's the first in a series, and maybe we'll like it, and who knows, like maybe we'll love it and we'll just keep going with the series. I've missed the feeling that came with like continuing to read the Horseman books, and not gonna lie. But we'll see. That's a magic that can't be easily, replicated. It's I honestly couldn't tell you a single thing about what the book is about. It's a romance between a person and a demon, and I know there's alcohol involved and people of color. I couldn't tell you anything else about it. I just picked it because people like it.
Yeah. And you were saying like, oh, I wish this book had sex. We were going from like no sex to like smutty fantasy, and I could not be happier, I'll be honest.
Yeah, I have no idea what it's about, but I've heard good things, and I'm confident that whether or not we like the book, a good conversation and a good
Definitely.
hangout will be had.
Definitely.
Thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate your time, appreciate the vibes, and always appreciate getting to talk to each other. And if you happen to join us for that, thank you very much. Until then, we will see you, and Chris will do her beautiful outro because she's the champ.
Thank you for making it to the end of our episode and spending some of your precious time with us. You can support Only Lovers Book Club for free by subscribing to our shows and sharing our episodes. Make sure to like the video if you're on YouTube or leave us a review if you are listening to the podcast, 5 stars, so the ancient deities don't come and kill your ass on our behalf. Okay? You can also become a supporter on Ko-fi and buy some books from our bookshop. All those links are in the description below. You can follow us on Instagram at Only Lovers Book Club.